Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Brewery Underground podcast. I'm Steve Sullivan.
Steve, hang on. You mean welcome to the best of the Brewery Underground podcast?
Hey, how is that even possible?
Well, the executive committee met and decided to send us out an assignment. You didn't get the memo?
I guess I'm asleep at the wheel again.
Well, while Steve works to get his act together, we present the best of the Brewery Underground podcast featuring some great guests, beginning with Carl Meyer of Black Abbey Brewing here in Nashville.
Let's talk about Black Abbey because you all have been brewing a beer in Nashville for quite some time. But for people that aren't really familiar, when did you guys get started with your brewery here in Nashville?
Sure. We opened at we've always been the same spot. We're over on Sidco Drive and the Berry Hill, Hundred Oaks part of the city. We opened in September of 2013, and so my business partners and I met in a homebrew club here in town. They used to meet over at Bosco's, if you remember, in Hillsborough Village, and so we would hang out over there and drink each other's beer. And then we formed sort of a subset of that club and started entering a bunch of beer into competitions, mostly trying to beat the guys in Music City Brewers, which was always very difficult to do. And so we, ended up winning some medals, and then we won a silver medal in the largest homebrew competition in the world at the time. It was in Oakland in 2008. And after that, we said, well, I don't know, maybe we ought to think about writing a business plan. And so we started working out a business plan, and my partners and I each had, I would do air quotes, regular jobs. And so we would, do our jobs and then work on this business plan at night and on the weekends and brew beer, and really wanted to focus on European influenced styles. And at the time, in that kind of early aughts, leading up to 2010, 2011, especially the local brands, their branding and I think sort of thought was very kind of 50s retro. They've got these big, bright, bold colors, and they're very, they got that sort of 1950s throwback vibe. But there really wasn't a lot of focus either in sort of brand identity or in the liquid on these more European styles. And the silver medal we won was for a Belgian dark strong. So we've always liked brewing with this sort of European framework in mind. And so we decided that was what we wanted to do, was make European influenced American craft. And what could be more European than naming your brewery as in the framework of a monastery or monastic brewing tradition. And so the Black Abbey references the monastery where Martin Luther wrote the 95 Theses that started the Protestant Reformation. Years later, after he was excommunicated, he married a nun, and then the two of them moved back into that monastery, which is called the Black Cloister. And Catherine brewed beer there and basically financed his ministry out of the monastery where the Protestant Reformation started. In the Middle Ages, it was common for the nuns to be the brewers, not necessarily the monks, which typically everybody nowadays thinks about these monastery breweries as being monk driven. But that was where that name came from. And so I was brewing one night and got to doing Wikipedia research and texted Mike and John and said, hey, I got it, we should call this brewery the Black Cloister. And the next morning John texted me back and said, drink 3 beers and try to say cloister. And we thought that was hilarious and true. And so I think that the thing about switching from Black Cloister to Black Abbey was the style of beer that Catherine would have been making in the Middle Ages. She wouldn't have had access to the same kind of brewing ingredients that we have now, like the beer. Like she couldn't have been making what we think of as German lagers. They didn't have temperature control. They didn't know what yeast was, much less how to propagate or culture specific lager ale yeast strains. The malt she would have been using would have been kilned probably over peat or fire of some sort, and have electric ovens to kiln stuff. So she would have been making something very similar to what we think of as a Belgian or an Abbey style ale. So we fit that Black Cloister and Abbey ale together, and that's where that name Black Abbey comes from. But we try to let everything that we do flow out of that European influenced American craft motto.
Everything you guys do, whether it's the artwork on the cans, the website, all ties into that. Who's obviously it's your idea, but who's kind of doing the artwork and stuff on the website and in the cans?
So it's honestly, it's been sort of a rogues gallery of people over time. The original idea started with the three of us and my partner John. He had a friend of his who was an artist that they went to kindergarten together. John Brooks was his name, and John Brooks was instrumental in designing the logo and the stained glass in the middle of the arch. I think that was he was very, very instrumental in that. And then when we were getting ready to put beer into cans, we realized that really wasn't anything that any of us knew anything about. And so we worked with an agency out of North Carolina called the Brandit. And so the Brandit really came up with the one that's kind of still sits in that format is the rose. The arch on the can with the big bold color around the outside and black on the inside of the arch. And they came up with the idea of having sort of an individual icon that's attached to each brand. So the rose has that white rose with a red heart and a black cross in the middle, which was Luther's crest. So that's where that came from. Special, which is our Belgian double, has a rooster. Luther oftentimes used a rooster as a sermon illustration. So much so, in fact, that the history of the weather vane is dictated from this story. They would put either murals or roosters on the top of the steeples of the Protestant churches, so that sort of the illiterate population knew which the Protestant churches were versus the Catholic churches. Brandon came up with that, and then we ran with it. And then here over the last couple of years, we've been starting to do a little bit of rebranding in terms of we've narrowed the arch on the can a little bit. We've brought the style of the beer really up to the forefront, moved the icon over to the side, and that we've handled internally. We've got Alex Frizzle, who does all of our graphic work, social media events, photography. He's been instrumental in doing a lot of that stuff.
Hey, Carl, I want to go back to the beginning of this podcast just a couple of minutes ago when you were talking about Bosco's, because
Mhm.
I've been here for 25 years, and I feel like Bosco's was almost like craft beer before craft beer was cool.
Absolutely. Yes, that's absolutely true. When I moved into Nashville in 1999, and there were 3 brew pubs in town. It was Market Street downtown, and then Blackstone over on West End, and Bosco's. Blackstone lays claim to be the oldest continuously operating brewery in the state, and they opened in 1994. Jeff with Black Horse in Clarksville would argue that point. I think they opened maybe the same month.
Okay.
So they're very, very close. But for the purpose of this, I'm going to side with Blackstone because Kent is a dear friend of mine, and I'm going to side with him. But then Bosco's started in Memphis. They had their original location was in Memphis, and then they opened 2 or 3 more. My wife got her master's at Vanderbilt, so we lived on campus for a while, and so that was a very convenient location for us to go and eat and get a beer. It's funny. One of the reasons we started kind of our own little offshoot of that Music City Brewers Homebrew Club was because you could smoke in the bar at Bosco's. And I was, for those beer nerd in me, I was like, I can't like smell or appreciate this beer because it's so smoky in here. And so we started having our own club, off-site club meetings with guys that weren't smokers. And isn't that funny? It's just, this was in, 2000. It's not like it was 20 years ago.
And it's funny because Scott, you've never been to Bosco's, right? Is that
I
correct?
no, never.
Okay. Because in conversations with some previous friends, and I've been here 25 years, moved here in 98. So I used to work downtown. And yeah, friends of mine, we would go to Bosco's. And as you mentioned, Carl, there were only a couple places you could go. It was Bosco's. As you said, it was Blackstone. We used to go to, the place that had 200 beers on tap down on Broadway.
Flying
Flying
saucer.
sauce.
Yeah, Flying Saucer.
Hmm.
And that was and that was basically it.
Thanks for listening to Best of Brewery Underground podcast. Hey, check out our merch at Underground Brew Merch on the Etsy store, undergroundbrewmerch.etsy.com.
And make sure to follow us at Sullivan Touron BreweryAdventures.com and on Spotify.
Now, back to the podcast with some highlights of our interviews with the Beer Babes. But what was the inspiration behind starting Beer Babes?
We start as an engagement group on social media. We find each other by miracle, and we were looking for more better ways to connect everybody all together. And at one point, we grow to like some breweries asking us to do beer for charity, and we're working really hard. And Rachel, at one point, she was like, "Why won't you do it for ourselves?" So that's what we're doing now.
And it's fantastic. What year was that when you guys started?
We opened the Beer Babes family in 2020, actually.
Okay. Oh wow, right during COVID, huh?
It's
Yeah.
going to be 4 years in June.
It's interesting that you guys talk about all of this, bringing everybody together, and you're like a family. When Scott and I started this podcast, we had talked about let's do a podcast about craft beer. And as I've thought about this over the last couple of months as we've been doing this, little did I really realize that there were so many community type related groups, including yours. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about that? About how this has really brought you all together and what it's really meant to all of you, all three of you.
I've just really enjoyed still feeling so closely tied to the beer industry because I wanted for quite a while to get into serving beer or working at a brewery, and I started back in 2021 with various artists brewing. You guys from Nashville may remember them.
I
But
do.
then
I miss
after
them.
they closed, that was, yes, it was such a sad day. But
Yeah.
the community at large and the industry just still embraced me and kind of kept me around, and that's why everyone still saw me everywhere. And finding a way to connect with women in the beer industry, especially. Who are far underrepresented. That's been really cool to kind of see exactly what we all can do for each other and together, and to hear how uplifting everybody is in our group chat, and how awesome everybody has been embracing me into the Beer Babes family. So it's been a lot of fun, and I can't wait to see where we go with this in 2024.
I would probably not be on social media anymore if it was not for the group we created. So, um, for me, having people that I can relate on that are literally my sisters that I can call and text every day and night, and I know if I catch a flight, they will probably join me somewhere. It is so empowering to, and we're never alone anymore. Like no matter what's gonna happen in my life, those women will be there for me.
So talk
Wonderful.
about that a little bit more, of the women that you've been able to reach out to and connect with and have now joined with you all. What has that meant for them? Have you found situations where maybe they were just searching and all of a sudden they have found you, and talk a little bit more about that?
I found most of the girl for almost a year. I was scouting Instagram for women in beer. Um, Not everybody is there for the same reason, so you can quickly see if they're there for the community and like the connection, or for the clout and the likes, which is okay too. You know what I mean? So we surround slowly ourselves with people who were looking for true connections as well.
You're listening to the Best of the Brewery Underground podcast. Matt Leaf, the president and founder of Rhizome Productions, and Kendall Joseph, the event manager, joined us on the podcast to talk about what they do.
We technically got started back in 2010. That was when I did the paperwork with the state to be a business. But our first event was in April of 2011, and we started everything with the East Nashville Beer Fest that will be celebrating 13 years on April 13th of this year. So we're preparing for that, excited for that. I'm sure we'll touch base on it. And when I got started, it was kind of a side hustle. I was in the tech world and working a full-time job, but I had about 4 to 6 computer monitors in front of me, and I just figured out how to do everything at the same time. Poorly multitasking, maybe, but kind of did it as a side hustle. Decided we would raise money for charity through a beer festival, and did that for a couple of years. On the side of the Winter Warmer came next. Then Brew at the Zoo kind of came out of the results of those 2 events, and then I think it was year 4, so let's say it was like 2015 or 2016, I made the decision to just make Rhizome full time. And really, when we started, it was all about beer festivals. So I had moved to Nashville from Atlanta and found a really great beer scene in Atlanta at the time that was way ahead of Nashville, not necessarily in terms of breweries, but in terms of just what you could drink and where you could drink. So Brick Store, many of you have probably been to or heard of, was kind of the place that opened my eyes when I got to Atlanta to beer. Sweetwater was around back then, and was actually one of the best happy hours in town on Fridays. You would go there and pay like $10 for a pint glass, which you were only supposed to get filled halfway. It was sampling, they called it. But if you left a nice tip, the bartender might have overfilled your glass. Many drunken Friday nights leaving the Sweetwater Brewery back then. My wife and I actually, often, right? Yeah. My wife and I actually had our like pre-wedding party in the tap room as well. So we were pretty hooked on their tap room back then. This was in like 2009. Obviously, lots changed at Sweetwater since then. But anyway, we get here, and I there's only 2 breweries making beer, really. The only beer festival that I can find is downtown. And I look at the beer lineup and I see Mike's Hard Lemonade and Peanut Butter and Jelly Blue Moon. And I'm like, there's got to be something more. And there wasn't. So that literally, it was kind of like Wayne, you've seen Wayne's World. It was just like Wayne's stock moment. I was like, if you build it, they'll come. And the first year we sold out. I think Kendall, you were in attendance, right? The first year, or you were not?
I was not at the first year. I attended in 2012.
That's right. So you made it to the second year. But there are people who attended the first year that are close friends. Some of them volunteer or work with us on a myriad of events that we do every year now, and have just been kind of our biggest supporters and friends and family, which is kind of cool. So really, in the beginning, it was all about beer. That kind of led to music. It kind of led to whiskey, wine, and now coming out of 2020 and thankfully being back to work, we find ourselves supporting large music festivals. We got a call today about a rally car race in Chattanooga that we might be working with. Kendall didn't know that yet.
Wow, that's cool. I like rally racing. I love rally racing.
Very preliminary, but essentially the skill set that we've been able to build in producing events, even though they may have been focused on beverage back in the day, it still is a skill set that's very transferable to any event. So we've diversified, which is a good thing. Obviously, everybody knows beverage changes, beer changes, people's taste change. Our audience has changed since we started. So it's been great to kind of be able to mold what we've taught ourselves. Because I will point out, I came into this with very little experience other than being an attendee to music festivals and concerts from, high school through college. And my wife always laughs, like we were at a music festival when we were first dating in college, and I was asking her how much ice I thought they went through. I was more interested in like the behind the scenes shit than maybe the music, but I enjoyed the music too. But there was always just some curiosity and enjoyment of the logistics and the process, and I still enjoy that stuff. But now, thankfully, Kendall's on the team. Brian, our director of operations, is on the team, and we've got an events team of a revolving door of, not revolving door because they quit all the time, but revolving door of who's available. Probably like 16 people. Kendall's wife has been involved for many, many years as well. Kendall and June, actually, his wife, started as volunteers at Volksfest, which is an event we don't do anymore. And we became friends, and they've been helping ever since, and then, on the payroll.
Hey, by the way, I need to crack open a beer here, which we usually do during the podcast.
Yeah, I was staring at mine unopened.
You guys drinking anything tonight?
I'm going to drink Maypop if you don't judge me.
Yeah, not at all.
I drank a little too much beer last night at the Super Bowl.
I've got a hazy IPA from Country Boy I picked up in Lexington, Kentucky Saturday when I was up there.
Very nice.
All right.
Pretty good beer.
I have the AOK IPA, and this is from Avondale Brewing, I think in Birmingham, and I've not had this one before.
Thanks. I have got Timid Little Tyrant from Burial Beer Company out of Asheville. 2 weeks in a row I've had Burial.
Doesn't count, but I drank Blackberry Farm Pilsner last night. I had a 6-pack to myself.
Those are good. Hey, I could vouch. I could see your beer scene behind you, so you've got some legitimate ones back there. So
there's some good stuff.
Hey, when did you know, Matt? Like at some point, as you're starting this thing out, I need help. Like as it grew, was it a year down the road? Was it like I just can't do this by myself anymore?
It's interesting how everything happened. Most of the people, pretty much everybody who has worked with us, whether it's event staff or on the sort of the daily or as needed, but more than just at events, it's all kind of been very natural, is really the best way to put it. Like I've never posted a job listing. I've never actually asked anybody if they wanted to work at Rhizome. It's more been like, hey, I want to help you. Like this is fucking cool. And Kendall kind of did that. Kendall was more on the event side, like specific for a while. And thankfully he's integral part of the team now. He still somehow manages to work a day job, but it'll be good for his retirement.
Crazy.
And then the same with Brian, our director of ops. He came from the distributor space in California and then in Tennessee, and helped us formulate a concept we used to do called Nuit Belge, which was all Belgian beer and food pairings that we did for about 5 years in Nashville, Atlanta, Charleston, and New Orleans. He came along basically as a friend, but kind of helped us with the idea the first year in Nashville, and then we took it on the road with Blackberry Farm, and we got Lexus involved. It was a pretty wild ride, and he just kind of he assumed this like active role and was like, hey, I'm gonna come work for you. And I was like, if you're gonna do what you did for Nuit Belge at every event, okay. So it's interesting. It's been a very natural, like unplanned growth, really. I mean, we always want to grow and do more, from a business perspective. So I'm always out there trying to find us more opportunities, and we're always conceptualizing new concepts. So it's kind of a very organically grown business is really the best way to put it. It's never, there's intentionality, but in terms of who's been part of the team, it's been more the want to be involved, not like, hey, come do this with us. Is that fair, Kendall?
Mm-hmm. That's totally fair. I think about most of the people we have on our team now. It's like, oh, this is a great event. I love being here. You guys want some help? And so many of our friends and people that, we even pay them a little bit now, but they started as volunteers because of this sheer love of what we're doing. I mean, we're basically just throwing big parties, and who doesn't love a good party?
And we always have fun doing it, and we always like have our own party after the party, or we take everybody out to dinner, or if we're traveling, we're going out for great dinners and paying for travel and hotels and all that fun stuff. Many fun weekends and Airbnbs around the country.
We love telling great stories on the Brewery Underground podcast, and Chris Shields, the Director of Education at Rhinegeist Brewery in Cincinnati, man, did he have a lot of good stories, including where did the name Rhinegeist come from?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I like it because it's a question that I had, right? I joined Rhinegeist a while ago, but it was already, I wasn't there from the beginning. And I also joined Rhinegeist at a time when I had just moved to Cincinnati. So it was basically the answer to that question kind of really helped me understand a little bit more about Cincinnati and the neighborhood where our brewery is, which is called Over the Rhine, or OTR. We are actually in an old pre-Prohibition era building. Two buildings really that are smashed together at this point, but they were part of the Christian Moorline Brewing operation, which was like 3 city blocks worth of OTR. And OTR was a bunch of breweries, 20 or 25 breweries in Cincinnati before Prohibition, many of them in that same part of downtown. And the reason that part of downtown was called OTR, or Over the Rhine, is that for anybody that's been to or is familiar with Cincinnati, Central Parkway was a canal.
Yep.
We had canals connecting the Great Lakes to the Ohio River and various other places to make sure that that was the trucking system of the day, is everything rode on barges through the rivers. So in order to get from the main part of downtown Cincinnati, the central business district, if you will, which is right on the river, you had to cross the canal to get up into this other neighborhood. And this other neighborhood was a even more German influenced part of a very German city. Cincinnati has a ton of German heritage, and OTR as a neighborhood was even more concentrated. They had German language schools and newspapers in the neighborhood because so many of the population were recent immigrants from Germany coming to work. And the 3 main things that happened in OTR was pork processing, wrought iron, manufacturing and construction, and brewing. Those were all things that these German immigrants could come and they would bring their families and they would find work. And so the joke became, to get into this neighborhood, you had to go over the Rhine or over the canal, because as a sort of joke about the Rhine River in Germany, it was like you were stepping into Germany. So our neighborhood has this huge history of German brewing. And we wanted, or I say we, I wasn't there when this plan was hatched, but our founders and what they wanted to do, Bob and Bryant, is while they wanted to bring a brewery back to this neighborhood, and they didn't want to bring a sort of traditional German style brewery. They wanted a modern brewery. But if you think about it, those breweries that we're talking about, they were modern, technologically advanced breweries of the time.
Exactly.
They were brewing, American lager and with the German tradition and German lager and using the best of technique and technology that they could. So that was the attitude that our Bob and Bryant took when founding Rhinegeist, was to say, let's honor that entrepreneurial spirit, that community connection, that feeling of bringing a brewery and bringing jobs and a life back to OTR, but do it in that same modern way. So our logo, if you're familiar, that skull drop, it's supposed to be a drop, a little bit of history in every drop of beer. So that's kind of the idea of a Rhine being a nod to both our name and the German heritage of the neighborhood. And then Geist is German for ghost or spirit. So there's sort of a double meaning there. So you've got the spirit of the Rhine, the sort of the history, that ghost part, but also, spirit is alcohol. So it kind of works both ways there. But that's really just kind of, I would say that the early days, the biggest question I got when I was like at a conference or visiting back home or something, like, oh, Rhinegeist, do you guys make, only German Pilsner or, exclusively German lagers? And I was like, no, but we're in a building that used to do that. And in a neighborhood that used to do that, in a city that used to do that. So And I think we still, we do make some of those styles, and I think we do a good job. But they're, they don't move off the shelves the way that some of the other things we make do.
Being from there, I think it's interesting because over the years, and this is probably going back, 10, 11 years or whatever, and you started to hear, and I know I did, over the Rhine, over the Rhine, over the Rhine. I'm like, over the Rhine, because, when I was growing up there, over the Rhine was a different area. It wasn't really a place that had breweries or places you went. And it's become so revitalized. And I think it was probably about 8 or 9 years ago, at least, was the first time that I stepped foot in Rhinegeist, and I'm like, wow, this whole area has changed quite a bit, and I feel like you guys have really been a big part of the revitalization in that entire area.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been at Rhinegeist for 9 years, and just the amount of change even in that time has been significant. We certainly weren't the first. Business down in that area. Really, it was restaurants and some bars that kind of started. You've got places like, Senate or the Eagle and Lackman and some of these other places, Japs, and these bars that have a long history, a recently long history in OTR to kind of bring people back. And now it's this, there's, as you said, there were, people would say like, well, I never went to OTR because there was nothing there. I mean, our building was vacant when we moved in. And that it was not uncommon. And there just was, I think it's really neat that, and I may get the specifics of this fun fact slightly wrong, but I believe OTR, that part of Cincinnati, has the most dense concentration of historic buildings, like kind of in a contiguous neighborhood of anywhere in the country.
Wow.
I would have thought Charleston or New Orleans or right, but it's basically because nothing was taken down, because there wasn't any reason to take anything down to build something else. So basically every building in OTR is, from the 1800s or early 1900s. Not all, and certainly there's been new construction over the last 10 years, but for a long time there just wasn't much being built.
He's become one of our favorite guests on the Brewery Underground podcast.
That's right, Scott Touron, but he is the other Scott, as in Scott Murdy of Nashville Brewing.
You collect, we've talked about beer cans. You've got over 3,000 beer cans.
Got about almost 10,000.
Was it 10,000?
Yeah.
10,000 beer cans.
I had about 3,000 by the time I was in high school.
Okay. That's
it's funny, real quick, when we started figuring out what we were going to focus on here, and there's so many different things, and I had that at the top of my list, but I thought, we gotta focus on like the history first. But then I'm going, and then this guy has all these beer cans. So, yeah.
Yes. Funny thing you sent earlier today, you sent us a video through Instagram, and it was from a 50 or 60 year old
60+ year old can. So beer can history, the can was first released in 1935. And so we didn't have beer in cans prior to that, but it was released in the test market in 35, and then by 1940 started to become more popular. And into the 50s, then we started seeing beer in cans and bottles about 50-50 at that point. But the pull tab was not invented until the late 60s. So prior to that, you had to use the kind of the slang word with the church key, but it's a can opener.
Uh-huh.
The can was flat, so you think like opening a can of high C punch or something. You had to use that can opener to open it. Or we had a cone top can, which looked like an old oil can that had a bottle cap on it. And so different breweries either use a flat top or a cone top. Just depending on the cone tops would fit through an existing bottling line, so they didn't have to invest in more capital equipment to have a canning line. But that Guinness can, so that's a can from late 50s, maybe early 60s, and I had it full and thought, wonder what this really tastes like. So popped that open, amazingly had a head still. I poured it through a coffee filter just to make sure it did not taste great, which I would not expect it to taste great. Oxygen is an enemy to beer, and unfortunately in canning, you can't control the oxygen nearly as much as you can in bottling or kegging. just because you can fill with CO2 and they can handle the pressure. Whereas the can, you can't do that as easily. And you got a bigger circumference area to seal, and it takes a little longer. So cans just have a shorter shelf life. So 60-year shelf life. The beer was not good, but it's kind of cool just to try it.
Absolutely.
I do that every once in a while. I've got a couple full Gerst bottles that one of these days I'll probably pop open.
Wait, how do you come across something like that? Obviously,
Just-
in your archive.
just in a lot of research, and old people, they'll turn up in old barns, and people know I collect, so people find that kind of stuff. They reach
You're probably a
out.
go-to, like, hey, look what I came across.
Exactly.
So I was going to ask you some of your other memorabilia that you get, the cans. Obviously, I think in your book I saw you had a bunch of different, like can openers and things.
Various can openers.
So what are some of your sources that you get? Or is it people just kind of coming to you, like you said?
Yeah, people will come to me locally. I think if you just start Googling, the Nashville Gerst bottle or can opener or something, my name will pop up as a collector. So, but there's several national organizations too. One's the Brewery Collectibles Club of America, the BCCA, and then there's the National Association of Brewery Advertising. Brewery is kind of the catch-all term for collecting beer advertising. Brewery. But the Brewery Collectibles Club of America, they have a national conference every year. It's called a canvention. So it's mostly beer can collectors, but collecting everything. So that canvention is in a different city every year. The city is going to be in Little Rock, and I'm actually there having me speak there at one of the seminars talking about beer history, just like we are today.
And then people would bring stuff.
Oh, it's a big buy-sell trade. So it's in a big convention center.
Okay,
so
that's awesome.
Generally, you got about 1,000 people attending, having trade tables. And
you come across stuff that you've never seen before, I guess.
Always. When you think you've seen everything from a particular brewery, something will surprise you.
Is there is there like a unicorn out there that you're kind of looking for? Is there anything?
Yeah, that I'm just always looking for something different that's Nashville. And so a lot of times I just don't know something like that exists until it pops up. In the beer can world, there's a can, ironically from Cincinnati again, but it's I think it's a heatable can. It's a gallon-sized can, a bigger can. It's got a camel on it, and there's only like 4 of those known to exist. They go for about $10,000 a wild piece. Although recently a can just sold in an auction for $60,000. I forget offhand what brand that was, but $60,000 for one empty beer can.
It's so amazing.
Well, you were very young when you started collecting.
I was about 7 years old. And that just started, my mom was a Girl Scout leader for my older sister, and I got dragged on a Girl Scout hike because I did not want to go, but my mom didn't want to pay for a babysitter, so I had to go, and I just saw some shiny beer cans on the side of the road or the paths and picked them up, and I got home, and I had 15, 20 beer cans. I still remember I had a Schlitz Tall Boy. It was one of those cans.
Wow.
And
was it in good shape when you found it?
It was decent shape, maybe a Pabst Blue Ribbon. I'm sure Budweiser.
Or PBR,
some of those cans. Yeah. And so then, my parents had a couple beers in the fridge. I said, hey, I want that can when you finish it. So then I had 25 cans. And like I said, my dad was traveling a lot, so he started bringing back cans. And then the people he was working with in the different countries he was going to would mail me cans. So it was like Christmas. I get all the time I get a big box, and there'd be 20 or 30 cans from Kenya.
Okay, I have to stop right there
amazing.
real quick because that was actually one of my questions. And before we go off, because I was like, I don't want to minimize that one. It was one of my questions of like, how many beer cans do you have from other countries? And so your dad traveled to other countries?
Yeah, and I still to this day, I like to, it used to be I would just collect any can I could find.
Yeah.
And you get to a point where, and this is how most collectors are, your collection gets so big that you got to start specializing.
Yeah.
And so obviously I started collecting in Nashville, Brewery. There's only 2 beer cans that were ever made in Nashville. There are 2 Gerst, a Gerst 57, a Gerst 77, those 2 brands. So those are the only 2 beer cans that exist. Have quite a few of those, great condition, and collecting world conditions, everything. But you start specializing, and because I had so many of the foreign cans just growing up, I really got into collecting these foreign cone tops and flat tops, which would be the cans from the 30s through the 60s, so the older ones. So some of them show up on eBay or trade shows, so that's what I'm looking for. And then being from Ohio, I do the same thing from Ohio. So I'm looking for older Ohio and foreign cans, and that's really what my focus is. I don't focus on modern cans now. And I'm so glad that craft breweries are canning now. I'm hoping a new generation will start getting into collecting. Unfortunately, millennials, they don't like to hang on to stuff.
Right.
But yeah, there's hope. There's some of them that are.
If there were just a few that would do it, right?
Exactly. Keep that hobby alive. And at some point, they're going to realize, hey, these are collectible. They're worth some money too.
Yeah.
Do you have beer cans from every state?
I probably do from every state. I'm pretty sure I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell you how many countries, but probably at least 70 or 80 countries.
Wow. And you're still collecting?
I still collect. Like I said, I do specialize, so I'm not into the volume anymore. It's more as just a quality versus quantity.
Have you met other people like you that collect this many beer cans? Anybody that has surpassed you in the number of beer cans that they have? That you know?
Surprisingly, to the serious collectors, my collection would be considered fairly small or average. We'll say average. There's people that have a lot more. But like I said, a lot of those people start specializing, and so they're looking at very specific older cans in excellent condition that be very valuable. So
almost like baseball cards or something.
Exactly.
Right?
Spending $500 on one can versus $500 for 500 cans.
Right.
That's a wrap on this episode. Join us next time as we'll be back from assignment bringing you the latest and the greatest.
And thanks for listening, everyone. For Scott Touron, I'm Steve Sullivan, and this has been the best of the Brewery Underground podcast.
Cheers, everyone.